Welcome to the hidden corners where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind.
And this is part 9 of the Wolfman Series, A Werewolf in Mexico. Rosa, the cook, had coffee brewing and breakfast ready. Miguel normally stayed up all night and slept in the next day, so Rosa was used to accommodating his nocturnal hours. Fresh tortillas and grilled beef with homemade salsa, plates of fruit, cactus flower fritters, everything was colorful and fresh. I could get used to this, Jack said as he loaded his plate full of food. Rosa poured fresh squeezed orange juice into his glass. Hair of the dog, she said under her breath as she placed a bottle of tequila in front of him. Cat giggled. Juanita and Julian sat side by side. Julian's story the night before had not scared her away. If anything, she seemed even more attentive to his needs, if that was even possible. She filled his plate, poured his orange juice, peeled his oranges. Jack rolled his eyes and Cat giggled again. Julian, you dog, Jack said. After all we went through in Colorado, here you are just as passive and sweet as a young pup. Julian laughed. And Cat added, just for the record, I think you owe us both an apology. Julian agreed. Sometimes the beast just takes over. Normally I can control it, but there are times when my emotions are so strong I can't hold it back. I'm sorry I scared you, Cat. I'm sorry I fought with you, Jack. Juanita took his face in her hand and turned it toward her. I'd like to see what happens when you can't hold it back, she said. Oh, come on, guys, Cat laughed. You're making me lose my appetite. Miguel finally joined the breakfast table. He was his usual jovial self. A big smile on his face as he greeted his guests. Finish up. We're going on a trip today. There is someone I want you to meet. Miguel, Juanita, and their 3 guests plied into Miguel's SUV and headed to the little town of Creel, nestled in the heart of the Sierra Madre Mountains, about 40 miles from Miguel's ranch. It was a pretty town filled with lakes, waterfalls, rivers, rocky ridges, forest caves, and the stunning Copper Canyons. But most importantly, it is where the Tarahumara people live. Miguel explained that the Tarahumaras are a group of indigenous people living in the Sierra Madres. Most still practice a traditional lifestyle, living in natural shelters in caves or cliff overhangs. They are known as the Raramuri, which means runners on foot, and are known for their long-distance running ability. They can run up to 200 miles in one session, over a period of 2 days, through their homeland of rough canyon terrain. They mainly hunt with bow and arrow, but they are known for their ability to run down deer and wild turkeys. They literally run their prey to death in what is called persistence hunting. The Sierra Madre is one of the most productive drug-growing regions on Earth. Logging is controlled by the Mexican government, but loggers and drug lords use the forest to grow marijuana and opium. Drug cartels have links with logging companies that launder money in the drug trade and pay off the government to use the land as they wish. In recent years, the Tarahumara have been exploited by the drug cartels. They're taking their land and they're forcing them to grow drugs instead of their own food crops. Narcotics trafficking is also a problem. Cartels exploit the Tarahumara's ability as long-distance runners and force them to run illegal drugs into the United States. See, they'll kidnap a child and tell the family that they'll only give it back if they run the drugs. Many times they make it, but often they're captured or killed. Then the child will be sold to human traffickers or killed. It's a terrible shame. But the reason we're going there today is because of their cattle. The Tarahumara are also known for a rare and pure genetic line of cattle. The Raramuri Criollo cattle are indigenous to the Copper Canyon region of the Sierra Madres. They're descendants of the first cattle brought to Mexico by Hernan Cortez and Villalobos. Until recently, these cattle were geographically isolated in the remote Rio Oteros region of the Copper Canyon. And the Tarahumara have raised this indigenous breed for over 500 years with no genetic introgression from outside breeds, which means it's very important to preserve their unique genetics. Cattlemen will pay a handsome dollar for pure breeding stock. It's interesting that the Tarahumara use the cattle for milk and companionship and rarely as a food source. The cows are often kept indoors adjacent to the house as a source of winter heat. Miguel added, and yet it is some of the finest tasting beef you can find. Jack mentioned that he'd heard of this rare breed of cattle. He had been a brand inspector in Montana and was a cattle rancher. This was the kind of thing he was interested in. He explained that the Criollo are related to the Corriente cattle that you'll see in the desert areas of North America and that no registered breed association exists for this biotype of cow. Ranchers in desert regions are excited about this breed because they do well in arid desert areas. They have milk that rivals that of a Jersey cow, and they're very tender and lean meat. And they are very gentle. In fact, they'll tag around after you like a dog. Well, that's all very interesting, but what does it have to do with us? Kat asked. 2 reasons, Miguel explained. First, I'm buying more breeding stock for my ranch. I positioned myself as the top exporter of this beef before my competition could lay claim to it. It's a smart move and a clean way to move some money. And secondly, the person we are going to meet is a Nahual. That is Mexico's equivalent to a werewolf. He is a shapeshifter, although he is more coyote than wolf. Just outside the little town of Creel, they were greeted by a man named Asa. He was standing in the road as if he knew the exact moment they would arrive. He was dressed in the traditional Tarahumara cloth headband and loincloth, held together by a strap of wool wrapped twice around the waist. He raised his arm in a salute, and Miguel pulled up beside him. He nodded once, then took off in a run. Miguel followed in his white SUV. Several miles, and at a steep incline, the man raced ahead. Doesn't he want to ride with us? Kat asked. I'm sure he's never been in a vehicle, Miguel answered. It is their custom to run wherever they can. Nestled underneath the ridgetop was a small house built out of stone right into the side of the mountain. Miguel explained that some of the Tarahumara still live in caves like this. Asa had lived in this cave for 68 years. Chickens were running around, and there was a fence enclosure made from sticks where several of the Criollo cattle of different colors were penned. Others roamed around freely. Asa spoke in a language that was not traditional Spanish, but a unique Mexican dialect that Jack had never heard before. Miguel was able to translate most of what he said. The Tarahumara follow an ancient religion that has bred into them a moral code so strict that they are unable to tell a lie. Over the centuries, this value system has actually caused physiological changes in their brain that preclude speaking anything but the truth. Nor can they cheat or fail to aid a fellow tribesman, but their way of life is slowly eroding away. The drug cartels are taking away their land and forcing them even higher into the mountains. They've fought off Spanish colonization, missionaries trying to convert them to Christianity, and now they have to rise up and fight again. Only this time it is the drug trade they are fighting. But they cannot fight with guns and swords. They cannot fight with aid from the government. The Mexican government does nothing to protect these people. The only way they can fight is to make the drug lords and the loggers fear them. Asa might be a Nahual, but he is old and he is the one man standing alone. If his people could all be shapeshifters, they could fight for themselves. Asa requests that you turn his people into wolves. Miguel explained that El Lobo, the Mexican gray wolf, has not been seen in Mexico for many years. They once numbered in the thousands, but they were killed by the mid-70s, with just a handful existing in zoos in the United States. The Mexican gray wolf is the most endangered subspecies of wolves in the world because of compromised genetics, human intolerance, and reluctance to reintroduce them into Mexico. Asa had a vision many months ago that 2 men from 2 different countries would come to save his people. He told me they were wolves. I laughed at him, and I thought it was just the ramblings of an old man. The last time I was here, about 4 months ago, he told me that these two men would appear at my home, and I was to bring them to him. Again I laughed. But then you called me and said you needed help getting into Mexico, and you wouldn't tell me why. Now, after hearing your story last night, I knew it was Asa's vision coming true. I told you that we would continue our story tonight at the campfire. I want to tell you of my Mexican ancestors, but I thought it was important for you to meet Asa first. When you hear my story, you'll understand why. Miguel spoke to Asa for several minutes in private and then prepared to leave. I told him we'd be back in 3 days with a truck to load the cattle and an answer from you. They said their goodbyes, and Asa put his hand on Jack's shoulder and looked deep into his eyes. He nodded his head, then repeated the same with Julian and then Kat. Jack, did you feel that? Kat whispered to Jack as they walked over to the SUV. What, you mean when he looked into your eyes? Yes, I felt something stir inside me. It was like he looked right into my very soul. But it was more than that. I felt this thing, I can't really describe it, but I felt something stir inside me. Jack, you must do this for him, she pleaded. Jack sighed. I know, I felt it too. He wondered if life would ever be normal again. That night, Miguel once again had a campfire roaring in the fire pit outside. He came strolling out of the house holding 2 bottles of tequila in one hand, 5 shot glasses in the other. He poured everyone a shot, then Miguel began his story. Like many countries, Mexican has its own werewolf legends, but ours are usually black dogs or coyotes that attack and kill people or livestock. They can run extremely fast, so they're hard to catch. They're very strong. They're loners. They're very protective of their territory. If one Nahual enters another's territory, it's a fight to the death. They can be killed if wounded badly enough. And the Mexicans also believe that if one is harmed while it's in animal form, they will show the same injury when they return to human form. And this was another way of identifying them. In different parts of Mexico, there are different legends. In the mountains of La Milinchi, it's thought that the villagers there are all women werewolves or witches. It's said that they sneak into homes at night to kill and eat children. That hardly seems believable, he laughed. When I was growing up, my parents told me stories about their childhood. They were born in a small pueblo in Mexico where many of the people are Nahuales. At night, these people have the ability to transform into an animal, such as a dog, or a coyote, or a snake, or a cat. They are powerful when they are in animal form, and they can do evil things. It was easy to know who the Nahuals were because they liked to wander at night. They could easily see in the dark. Sometimes you would see a dog walk out a door at night, but in the morning it would be a human who would walk back in. My mama was cursed by a Nahual. Every time my mama was pregnant, she suffered. When she was about to give birth, she saw a black dog with red eyes at nighttime. She lost 4 children. They died before she could give birth to them. Her stomach would turn purple and then black. My papa took her to a curandera who gave her a herbal medicine to take and perform a ritual cleansing. The curandera told her it was an evil Nahual causing her suffering, that it was a woman who was in love with my father. She wanted revenge because my father married my mother instead of her. She was the black dog that my mother would see at night. The curandera was a bruja, a witch. She cured my mom by putting a spell of protection around her. My mother was able to give birth to me a year later, but as I grew up, I would see a black dog following me around if I was out at night. It stayed back, but if I turned to look at it, it would glare at me with red eyes. One night I awoke to find the black dog in my bedroom. It was in the corner of my room staring at me with those red eyes. I threw my pillow at it, and it sprung into the bed and bit me. I tried to fight it off, but it ripped into my arm. I screamed, and my dad ran into the room. The dog jumped out the window. My dad quickly closed the window and wrapped a towel around my bleeding arm. After that, I developed a very bad infection and was put in the hospital for a couple of weeks. My dad went to the curandera that had saved my mother, and she gave him a poultice to spread on my wound. Immediately it began to heal and I was able to come back home. My dad told me that when he was a young man he dated a girl from his village. But then he met my mother and fell in love with her. He married her and his old girlfriend has haunted him ever since. She was the black dog that tried to kill my mother, and now she had tried to kill me as well. The Bruja's protection spell was strong enough to keep the black dog from my mother, so that's why she came to me instead. But now that she had bitten me, my body started to change. I grew hair on my body and on my face. I started wanting to go out at night. I got it in my mind that if I found this woman and killed her, I would be free from this curse. I went to the neighboring village where my father was born and I found her. She just looked like a helpless old woman. So I waited till nightfall when she would go roaming in her dog body. I saw her leave her home and I followed her. She trotted right down the road to our village, several miles away. My father would never go out at night because he was afraid of her. But that night he found me missing from my bed, and so he went outside looking for me. I saw the black dog lunge at him and I jumped on her. We fought and I tore open her throat with my teeth. I was protecting my father. But I had my first taste of blood. Now I'm a grown man and I have killed many of my enemies. In my line of work, one cannot trust anyone. But I trust you, Jack. My housekeeper, Rosa, my sister, Juanita, are the only ones who know the truth about me, until now. I'm asking you to help me, to join me. Together we can stop the drug lords from taking this land from the Tarahumaras. Together we can fight the Juarez cartel and the Sinaloa cartel and the Zetas. They're all fighting against each other for this land. They are ruthless killers. They decapitate and mutilate their rivals and they dump them in public places to instill fear in the public and to the police. Well, now we will instill fear in them. We will be an army of wolves. Julian stood and walked over to Miguel's chair and put his hand on Miguel's shoulder. I will help you. I am a wanted man. I may never be able to return to Germany, but I am alive today because of you 4 people right here. I will help you fight. Jack looked over at Kat and sighed deeply, removing his cowboy hat. Look, there's a lot of things I don't understand. I don't know how deeply entrenched you are in this whole drug business. I don't know what kind of money laundering you do or what kind of criminal activities you've been a part of in your past or even right now. But I know I don't like what's happening with the trafficking of drugs into the U.S. And I know I don't like it when a peaceful community of people gets bullied into losing their land, their livelihood, their culture, and their lives. The idea of doing whatever I can to help take down the drug cartels is a noble pursuit, worthy of any man. But I sure as hell won't do it if you're just repositioning yourself to be the kingpin. Your agenda must be an honest one, or I don't want a part of it. I think you better tell us a little more about this line of work you're in, Miguel. Miguel looked down at his boots for a moment. Jack, you are an honorable man and you deserve to know the truth. I grew up on a ranch outside Ciudad Juarez. It is the epicenter of violence in Mexico. The violence in my city has given rise to all sorts of stories, and all of them are true. It is not uncommon to see a dog running in the street with a human bone in its mouth. We joke that in Juarez you throw your dog a human head instead of a ball. That is not far from the truth. It is very difficult to be an honest businessman and a rancher in Mexico. We have 7 major drug cartels and many drug gangs maneuvering for control, and they are continually forming allies and enemies with each other and with the government and the police officials. They all vary in sophistication and organization, but one thing you can be sure of is that the corruption is at all levels. The Sinaloa cartel has a special unit called Los Pilones, with recruited police officials and military deserters. So the Gulf cartel started the Los Zetas, with deserters from Mexico's airborne special forces groups. Now, these elite soldiers have the tactical skills, intelligence gathering capability, marksmanship, and rapid deployment tactics of a highly organized military unit. The Zetas were formed in 1999, and now they are their own cartel fighting for control of the U.S.-Mexican border. And they pay their soldiers much more money to work for them than the government does. It's rare to find a police officer or a soldier that is not on the cartel's payroll. Murder is so common here that it is estimated that someone disappears every hour of every day. Honestly, I think that's an underestimate. Murdering people and hiding their bodies has become a kind of a national sport, if not an epidemic. They see no difference between killing men or killing deer or a mouse. I heard one man say that if he didn't kill someone every day, he felt he hadn't done his duty. Jack, you knew me back when I was a cocky young bull rider, full of grit, but fame comes at a price. You have no idea what it's like. Every day, your life is on the line. It was late October 2009, just before the Zetas' declaration of war against the Gulf cartel. I was doing a little horse trading, investing in some quarter horses for racing. Horses have always been my passion. Well, I got lucky and I had a sweet little sorrel colt that had come from a top bloodline and was fast. In Mexico, quarter horse racing is an obsession steeped in northern Mexico's proud ranching heritage. Every cartel has its favorite jockeys, its favorite trainers, and horse agents. And owning the best bloodlines was a source of pride, and the drug lords were always trying to outshine each other on the track. Well, my little sorrel qualified for one of the most prestigious quarter horse races in America. That year he was set to race in the Dash for Cash Futurity in Texas, one of the most lucrative races of the season, with a $500,000 purse. Hell, the race is held every October at the Lone Star Park Racetrack in Grand Prairie, not that far from Dallas. I was approached by a horse agent who was buying up breeding stock and racehorses for the Zetas. With so much money on the line, they wanted my horse. They weren't about to let my horse win if they didn't own it. I knew the race was fixed. With so much money on the line, races are not left solely to fate or a horse's natural ability. Often a horse will be shocked with electrical volts from a handheld device so it'll run faster. That practice is called buzzing. It's illegal in the United States, but it's still used by some jockeys. They will test the horse beforehand to see what its reaction is. Does the horse spook and jump, or does it bolt? Will it cause them to have that extra surge of speed needed to win? Well, they wanted my horse, and if I didn't sell it to them, both me and my horse would be dead. It was easy for them to build a racing dynasty in the United States. Transactions were often in cash and sealed with nothing more than a handshake. They used horses to funnel their money through U.S. banks. They set up front companies in the U.S. to mask their involvement in the horse business. They would bid on valuable horses and put any name they wanted on the ownership documents. But the Zeta cartel wasn't sure he could trust his horse agent. They suspect that he had been padding his expenses, and they offered me the position. I had no choice but to take it, otherwise I would be killed. They offered me an outrageous sum of money. They told me that I'd never have to touch an ounce of cocaine, that I would never be expected to run drugs or be involved in the drug trade whatsoever. My business would be strictly legitimate, buying and selling horses for the cartel. I could have my ranch, breed the finest horse stock, and still rodeo and be a cowboy. It seemed like a dream come true at the time. In my opinion, there is nothing more Western than quarter horse racing. A lot of people want the thoroughbreds, but quarter horses are lightning fast sprinters. They're smart and they're agile. They can work all day herding cattle, then race on the weekends. In quarter horse racing, even an ordinary ranch horse and its owner has a chance at being a champion. Thoroughbred racing is for the elite, not quarter horse racing. Well, by January of the following year, my horse had already won 2 prestigious races, set a new speed record, and been awarded Racehorse of the Year at Heritage Place. In a very short period of time, I had developed a reputation as the horse breeder that was unmatched in quarter horse circles. Well, but then the FBI got involved. I was in way over my head at this point. I had one of the highest valued broodmares in the business. My name was spoken in all the horse racing circles. I was laundering millions of dollars a month for one of the most dangerous drug cartels in Mexico, and I'd been set up as the fall guy. I was given a choice by the FBI. Either spend my life in a federal prison in the United States or give the FBI information they could use to bring down the operation. I was told that I would be given refuge in the U.S., a new identity, kept safe. Well, I know for a fact that isn't true. If you crossed the Zetas, there was nowhere in the world you can hide. They will find you and they will kill you, and it would not be a pleasant way to die. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Somehow I had to outsmart both the FBI and the cartel if I was going to come out of this alive. Meanwhile, the war was intensifying. The Gulf Cartel had joined forces with the Sinaloa Cartel, their former competitor, to wipe out their greater enemy, the Zetas. Convoys of SUVs with heavily armed men in tactical gear were driving into small towns searching for Zetas to kill. My boss, the head of the cartel, summoned to his ranch a handful of men who were crucial to his American racing dynasty. He had a plan for expanding his empire north of the border, but he needed successful businessmen who could spend millions of dollars in the U.S. without raising any suspicion. I had been buying valuable racehorses and arranging races for several years now. We were running horses at the tracks under several different owners' names, usually listed as LLCs. All our horses had been renamed after expensive sports cars like Maserati, Bugatti, Porsche, which was unusual because most owners like to keep a horse's original name to show its pedigree. Well, since ours had been changed, it would be difficult to trace the original owners. It was easy to set up the LLCs, and the horses could be shuffled from one to the next quite easily, each time moving more of cartel's money through the U.S. banks. The All-American Futurity in the small mountain town of Ruidoso, New Mexico, was the next big race coming up. There would be a $2 million purse, the largest in its history. Anyone serious in the racing circles would be there. You might say the All-American is on the same scale as the Kentucky Derby, only for quarter horses. It was held every Labor Day, right after one of the biggest auctions of the year for yearlings that will be trained to race the following year. And some of the most valuable racing bloodlines the industry had to offer would be there, along with all the big players. Well, the 3-day weekend culminated in the All-American Futurity on Labor Day. Only 10 horses can qualify for this grueling 440-yard race. More than 400 horses compete for placement, and horses that were picked could claim to be some of the world's fastest. My horse was one of them. The world speed record had been set here during the 2006 race when a horse called No Secrets Here had demolished the 440 in less than 21 seconds, clocking a speed of 43 miles an hour. I didn't think my horse could beat that record, but I did think I had a good chance of winning the race. My horse was definitely not the long shot. Well, the Ruidoso Downs racetrack is in a small green valley with juniper scrub and surrounded by pine tree-covered mountains. On Labor Day, the stands overflowed with spectators for the race. Before the race began, the jockeys made a quick pass through the indoor betting area, crowded with gamblers and people lined up for drinks at the kiosks. Most of the spectators sitting in the stands were Mexican or Mexican-American. Down in the air-conditioned turf club and VIP boxes, many of the faces were white, but it was no secret that the future of U.S. quarter racing was Latino. However, as you will see in a moment, the industry is picking up major interest in Brazil and Portugal. The bugle player began playing the call to post, and the horses filed down the red dirt track towards the starting gate. The excitement in the crowd was palpable. Everyone cheered as the horses passed by, preparing to line up. Everyone was paying attention. You see, even though it is a 440-yard race, which is a quarter of a mile, these horses can cover that distance in less than half a minute. I heard the clap of the metal starting gate fly open, and the horses' hooves hit the track, sounding like thunder. Suddenly, out of nowhere, there was a huge explosion. I heard screams, gunshots, more explosions. People were running, falling over each other in their hurry to exit the stands. I couldn't tell which direction the shots were coming from. There was smoke and everything was a blur. I felt someone grab me and a bag was thrown over my head, and I felt a gun pointing into my back, guiding me away. But people were pushing against me, and I tripped over something or someone in the aisle. I fell. My head went down and I hit something hard, probably the edge of a bench. I felt something fall on top of me and a burning sensation in my side. Then everything went black. The next 24 hours were a blur. I woke up only to feel a hypodermic needle being shoved into my arm, and then everything went black again. I didn't know it at the time, but days had passed while I was in captivity, drugged and held hostage. When I did finally awake, I was sitting in a dark cement room, strapped to a chair with zip ties. My mouth was gagged and my head hung forward. Every part of my body hurt, and I realized that the strange taste in my mouth was probably blood. I was alone in the room. It hurt to move my head from side to side, to look at my surroundings. My eyes didn't seem to open very wide and appeared to be swollen shut. I knew I'd been beaten up pretty badly, even in my state of consciousness. As I was to learn later, it was not the FBI or the cartel that held me. I had been taken by the Brazilian underground mafia, and that was just the beginning of the story, Miguel said as he got up and stretched. Time for another bottle of tequila. He walked away to the hacienda, leaving everyone anxious to hear the rest of the story.